I'm going to speak a little bit more about the context of the first election of Franklin D. Roosevelt, his inauguration in 1933, and the social and political context that he found himself in, and also some of the powerful people outside politics, but still interested in politics, whom he had to contend with. Now, I'm going to read first a little bit more from this biography of Roosevelt by Gene Edward Smith, and then I'm going to move on to some sections from my own novel about this period in time, The Business Army. Smith writes, Roosevelt was elected on November the 8th. Inauguration was not until March the 4th. That 4-month hiatus, coinciding with the fourth winter of the Depression, proved the most harrowing in American memory. 3 years of hard times had cut national income in half. 5,000 bank failures had wiped out 9 million savings accounts. By the end of 1932, 15 million workers, 1 out of every 3, had lost their jobs. Repeat, 1 out of every 3. U.S. Steel's payroll of full-time workers fell from 225,000 in 1929 to 0 in early 1933. When the Soviet Union's trade office in New York issued a call for 6,000 skilled workers to go to Russia, more than 100,000 applied. Quote, no one can live and work in New York this winter, end quote, noted Tugwell, continue quote, without a profound sense of uneasiness. Never in modern times has there been so widespread unemployment and such moving distress from sheer hunger and cold, end quote. From Chicago, the critic Edmund Wilson wrote, quote, there is not a garbage dump in the city which is not diligently haunted by the hungry, end quote. The situation in the countryside was equally bad. Gross farm income had declined from $12 billion in 1929 to $5 billion in 1932. At the same time, agricultural surpluses, crops and livestock that farmers could not sell, rotted on farms or were plowed under. Wheat for December delivery dropped to 23 cents a bushel, the lowest since the reign of Queen Elizabeth I 300 years earlier. In Iowa, a bushel of corn was worth less than a package of chewing gum. In the South, thousands of acres of fine, long staple cotton stood in the field unpicked, the cost of ginning exceeding any possible return. Children went hungry in every corner of the land. In the coal mining areas of West Virginia and Kentucky, more than 90% of the inhabitants were suffering from malnutrition. In the nation's major cities, only 1 out of 4 unemployed workers was receiving any relief whatever. In Philadelphia, those fortunate enough to be on relief rolls received $4.23 per week for a family of 4. Many state and local governments, including the city of Chicago, ran out of money to pay their teachers. In Alabama, 81% of the children in rural areas went schoolless. Georgia closed more than 1,000 schools with a combined enrollment of more than 170,000. Homeowners were being foreclosed at a rate of well over 1,000 a day. Farmers lost their land because they could not pay taxes or meet mortgage payments. On a single day in April 1932, 1/4 of the entire state of Mississippi went under the hammer of auctioneers at foreclosure sales. Violence simmered beneath the surface. In Iowa, farmers declared a farm holiday, blocked holidays with logs and telephone poles, smashed headlights and punctured tires with their pitchforks. When authorities in Council Bluffs arrested 55 demonstrators, more than 1,000 angry farmers threatened to storm the jail unless they were released. Wisconsin dairy farmers dumped milk on the roadsides and fought pitched battles with deputy sheriffs. In Nebraska, farm holiday leaders warned that unless the legislature took beneficial action, quote, 200,000 of us are coming to Lincoln and will tear that new state capitol building to pieces, end quote. In Idaho and Minnesota, the governors declared moratoriums on mortgage foreclosures until state legislatures could enact debt relief measures. In North Dakota, Governor William Langer mobilized the National Guard to halt farm foreclosures. Hoover's doctrinaire attachment to the free market precluded government intervention. Even more serious in terms of long-term recovery, the president did his utmost to inveigle, this is President Hoover, to inveigle FDR into endorsing the administration's policy. Quote, I am convinced, Hoover wrote Roosevelt, that an early statement by you will help restore confidence, end quote. What Hoover had in mind was that FDR pledged to retain the gold standard, adopt a balanced budget, and impose additional taxes rather than raise money through government borrowing. Roosevelt should also disavow any effort to ensure home mortgages, rule out loans to states and municipalities for public works, disclaim proposals for government development of hydroelectric power in the Tennessee Valley, and desist in his opposition to a national sales tax. Quote, I realize that if these declarations be made by the president-elect, Hoover wrote Senator David A. Reed of Pennsylvania a few days later, he will have ratified the whole major program of the Republican administration. That is, it means the abandonment of 90% of the so-called New Deal, end quote. Roosevelt refused to be drawn in. Now, I'm going to read from my novel, and this includes long sections of Roosevelt's inauguration speech. You have to remember that Roosevelt, who had been crippled by polio, had a great deal of difficulty walking, but he never publicly acknowledged that he was disabled. And so when he went to his inauguration, there's quite a famous photo, by the way. Let me just show this to you first. This is the, just hold on a sec here. I hope this is, let me just change screens here. This is a famous photograph of FDR and Hoover riding to the inauguration. Apparently they did not speak to each other. They just sat together in silence. And when Hoover, or rather Roosevelt, arrived at the inaugural podium, he had some trouble walking up to the podium. Nevertheless, he put a brave face on things, and this is the way my screenplay novel handles that particular day. Roosevelt reaches the podium, stops for a brief moment to compose himself, and observes the audience. SFX, polite applause. Roosevelt, I am certain that my fellow Americans expect that on my induction into the presidency, I will address them with a candor and a decision which the present situation of our people impel. This is preeminently the time to speak the truth, the whole truth, frankly and boldly. Cut to exterior, the audience. A man in a top hat looks at Roosevelt impassively. His wife, a portly woman with what seems at first to be a rather stolid face, but upon closer inspection turns out to have kind eyes, regards FDR with a hopeful, generous smile. Roosevelt, continuing. In such a spirit, on my part and on yours, we face our common difficulties. They concern, thank God, only material things. Values have shrunken to fantastic levels. Taxes have risen. Our ability to pay has fallen. Government of all kinds is faced by serious curtailment of income. The means of exchange are frozen in the currents of trade. The withered leaves of industrial enterprise lie on every side. Farmers find no markets for their produce. The savings of many years in thousands of families are gone. Pan across the audience. A man is standing in the crowd, younger than the couple in the stands. He is also with his wife and also with his infant son, who his wife coddles. The man looks at FDR with what can only be described as rapt wonder. Cut to a close-up of FDR continuing, the cadence of his voice becoming more musical, more inspiring. Yet our distress comes from no failure of substance. We are stricken by no plague of locusts. Compared with the perils which our forefathers conquered because they believed and were not afraid, we have still much to be thankful for. Nature still offers her bounty, and human efforts have multiplied it. Plenty is at our doorstep, but a generous use of it languishes in the very sight of the supply. Primarily, this is because the rulers of the exchange of mankind's goods have failed through their own stubbornness and their own incompetence, have admitted their failure and abdicated. Practices of the unscrupulous money changers stand indicted in the court of public opinion, rejected by the hearts and minds of men. And then cut to the smoking room of a country club. Now, just to give some context to all this, I will go back to, hold on a minute here. This is Roosevelt photographed at his speech. As you can see, he's quite an impressive figure. There's no sign of his disability, and he was a very gifted public speaker. He, you have to remember, was born to great wealth. In fact, there were quite a few wealthy Americans who considered him one of theirs and were somewhat taken aback by some of his political ideas. In any case, one particular issue which concerned the wealthy in America was something called the gold standard. And the gold standard meant that the amount of dollars that were printed, the amount of paper money that was printed, had to be backed by gold. The US Treasury had to have the equivalent amount of gold stored away in safekeeping as the amount of bills that it printed. Of course, in contemporary society, this seems like a terribly old-fashioned idea, but at the time it was considered essential because there was still sort of a disbelief in the integrity of paper money. And at the same time, for Roosevelt to bring about some of his really, again, within, from point of view of a modern 21st century perspective, to bring about some of his ideas for stimulating the economy meant moving off the gold standard and accruing more government debt with the ultimate aim of stimulating the economy. Now, some of the people who were against this idea, just hold on a second here, were industrialists, such as this fellow, Irene DuPont, of the fabulously rich DuPont family, which was the preeminent chemicals manufacturing company of the world in the early 20th century, and had made absolutely enormous amounts of money during World War II because of its involvement in munitions manufacturing. And another person who was very, very influential in terms of American economic organization and economic power was this fellow, John Pierpont Morgan, Jack Morgan, the son of the famous banker Pierpont Morgan. He was born to extraordinary wealth. He was sort of a phlegmatic type, but he too was concerned about this idea of moving off the gold standard. Now I'll continue back to my novel manuscript. Cut 2, interior, the smoking room of a country club. A sizable radio is by a bookcase. A group of men in particularly well-tailored clothes stand listening to FDR. Roosevelt continuing on the radio. The money changers have fled from their high seats in the temple of our civilization. We may now restore that temple to the ancient truths. The measure of the restoration lies in the extent to which we apply social values more noble than mere monetary profit. First man, venomously, listen to that. Second man, it's a typical political speech. First man, typical? Just listen to him. He's preaching class hatred. Second man, have a drink, DuPont. Words are just words. Actions are something else altogether. We'll see what the fellow tries to get up to before getting emotional about it all. First man, DuPont. To a third man sitting comfortably in a chair. Morgan, you have some sense. Is this rabble-rousing or is it not? And is it not the speech of a rabble-rouser that acts to incite trouble? Morgan, Riley. You're the chemicals man, DuPont. You tell me what can cause an ignition or not.